You probably already know what you should do. You know you should exercise. You know you should stop putting things off. You know you should tell the truth when lying would be easier. You know you should keep the promises you make to yourself. And yet knowing all of this seems to change surprisingly little. So we wait for something else. Motivation. We hope that tomorrow we will wake up feeling disciplined, courageous, focused, and ready to become the person we keep telling ourselves we want to be. But Aristotle had a very different way of thinking about this problem. He believed that character is not something you simply possess. It is something you build, and you build it through what you repeatedly do. That means the small action you take today may matter for a reason much bigger than the result it produces today. It may be training the person you are becoming. The modern problem. Think about how most attempts at self-improvement begin. Something happens that gives you a burst of emotion. You see an unflattering photograph of yourself, so you decide to get fit. You miss an important deadline, so you promise to become more organized. You hurt someone with a lie, so you decide that from now on you will always be honest. For a few days, perhaps even a few weeks, the change feels real. You are motivated. Then life becomes ordinary again. You are tired. Work gets busy. The weather is bad. Nobody is watching. And suddenly, the person who was definitely going to the gym 4 times a week is negotiating with themselves about whether walking to the kitchen counts as cardio. This is usually where we conclude that we have a motivation problem. But Aristotle might say we have misunderstood the problem. Motivation is a feeling. Character is a pattern. And if your plan depends on feeling enthusiastic every time you need to do something difficult, your plan depends on something you cannot reliably control. The deeper question is not, how do I keep myself motivated? It is, how do I become the kind of person who does this even when motivation disappears? That is where Aristotle becomes useful. Aristotle's central idea. Aristotle wrote about ethics more than 2,000 years ago, but he did not treat it as an abstract subject whose purpose was simply to produce clever arguments. For him, studying how to live well was supposed to affect the way you actually lived. And one of the most important ideas in his ethics is that good character is developed through practice. We become better by repeatedly doing the kinds of things a good person would do. In other words, virtue is not simply one good decision. It is a settled quality of character. Imagine 2 people who both tell the truth in a difficult situation. The first person normally lies whenever honesty becomes uncomfortable. But this time, perhaps because they are afraid of being caught, they tell the truth. The second person has spent years practicing honesty, including when honesty costs them something. The outward action might look identical, but the character behind it is different. For Aristotle, that difference matters. One honest act does not automatically make you an honest person, just as one dishonest act does not permanently make you a liar. Character emerges from a pattern, and this means every repeated action is doing 2 things at once. It is producing an immediate result, and it is making the next similar action slightly more natural. Think of walking through tall grass. The first time you cross a field, there is no path. You push through the grass. The route is awkward, but if you walk the same way every day, a track begins to appear. Eventually, following the path requires almost no thought. Aristotle's idea of habit works in a similar way. Your actions create paths in your character, and eventually you begin to travel along them automatically. The uncomfortable part is that this works in both directions. You can practice courage, but you can also practice avoidance. You can practice honesty, or you can practice convenient little lies. You can practice discipline, Or you can practice giving yourself an exception every time discipline becomes inconvenient. So the question becomes, what are your repeated actions training you to become? Honesty. Start with honesty. Most of us imagine honesty is tested during dramatic moments. A courtroom, a betrayal, a secret that could destroy a relationship. But character is usually built somewhere much less cinematic. Someone asks why you are late. You could tell the truth, or you could make the traffic slightly worse than it really was. You make a mistake at work. You could admit it, or you could quietly phrase the story in a way that makes the mistake look like someone else's. Someone asks whether you have completed something you promised to do. You say, almost, meaning no. These moments feel tiny, and individually they often are. But Aristotle's insight is that the importance of an action cannot be measured only by its immediate consequences. Each time you choose honesty when a small lie would be easier, you are rehearsing honesty. And each time you lie simply because it is convenient, you are rehearsing that too. The next decision does not begin from zero. You bring your previous practice with you. Courage. The same is true of courage. We often imagine courage as something heroic people somehow possess. But courage rarely arrives fully formed when the crisis begins. It is practiced beforehand. You practice it when you ask the question you are embarrassed to ask, when you admit that you do not know something, when you have the uncomfortable conversation instead of postponing it for another month, when you apply for something even though rejection is possible, when you say what you genuinely believe instead of automatically saying whatever will make everyone comfortable. None of these actions guarantees that you become courageous, but they train your relationship with fear. If your response to discomfort is always avoidance, avoidance becomes familiar. If your response is occasionally to move toward the thing that scares you, carefully, intelligently, and for a good reason, then courage becomes more available when you actually need it. You do not wait until you feel fearless. You practice acting well while fear is still present. And if this idea is already making some of your daily habits look slightly more important than they did 5 minutes ago, like the video and subscribe. Past Minds takes philosophical ideas from across history and turns them into practical tools for modern life. No sudden transformation montage required. Fitness. Fitness makes Aristotle's idea almost impossible to ignore, because the body gives us visible evidence of something that also happens psychologically. Nobody becomes fit because of one heroic workout. One workout matters. But what changes you is the pattern. The person who exercises for 30 minutes 3 times a week for a year will usually accomplish far more than the person who destroys themselves in the gym for 6 days every January. And something else changes along the way. At first you may say, I am trying to exercise. Eventually you begin to say, I exercise. The behavior has started becoming part of how you understand yourself. This is much closer to Aristotle's view of character than the modern obsession with motivation. The goal is not to feel inspired enough to perform one impressive action. The goal is to repeat a reasonable action until doing it becomes characteristic of you. Reliability. Now consider reliability. You tell someone, I'll send that tomorrow. Tomorrow comes. You are tired. It would be easy to delay it, and there may be almost no consequence if you do. This is exactly why the moment matters. Reliability is not built when keeping your word is urgent and everyone is watching. It is built when breaking your word would be easy. Every small promise you keep teaches other people something about you, but it also teaches you something about you. If you repeatedly do what you said you would do, you start accumulating evidence that your own commitments mean something. And that leads to perhaps the most personal version of this idea: the promises nobody else knows you made. Self-discipline. You decide that tomorrow morning you will get up at 7. The alarm rings. Nobody else cares what happens next. There is no applause for getting out of bed. There is no public scandal if you press snooze. But you know what you told yourself. And if you repeatedly learn that your private commitments disappear the moment they become inconvenient, you are practicing a certain kind of relationship with yourself. You begin expecting your own decisions to be temporary. Self-discipline, then, is not really one enormous act of willpower. It is built through smaller moments in which you teach yourself. When I decide that something matters, my actions usually follow. Not always. Usually. That distinction matters, because Aristotle's idea can easily be turned into something much harsher than he intended. Habit is not mindless repetition. There is a tempting but misleading version of this philosophy that says, just repeat the behavior enough times and you will become virtuous. But Aristotle's view is more demanding than that. Virtue is not mindless repetition. The reason for the action matters. Judgment matters. Circumstances matter. Consider courage again. Someone who takes pointless risks because they enjoy danger is not necessarily courageous. Courage involves responding appropriately to fear for the right reasons. And honesty does not mean saying every thought that enters your head. If your friend gets a terrible haircut, Aristotle is not standing behind you demanding a 20-minute forensic analysis of it. Good character requires judgment. There is also another danger. You can become so focused on perfect consistency that one failure feels catastrophic. You miss a workout, you lose your temper, you procrastinate, you tell a lie you regret, and immediately the story becomes, "This proves I haven't changed." But if character is a pattern, one failure cannot define you any more than one good action can. What matters is what you repeatedly return to. There is a major difference between "I failed once" and "failing once is now my permission to stop trying." The first is part of being human. The second begins a new pattern. And this is why Aristotle's idea is more forgiving than it may initially sound. You do not need to transform yourself today. You need to pay attention to what you are practicing. Practical exercise. The character vote. So here is one exercise to try for the next 7 days. Choose one quality you want to develop. Only one. Maybe honesty, courage, reliability, self-discipline, patience, or consistency with your health. Then write this sentence somewhere you will see it. What would practicing this look like today? Not, how do I become completely disciplined? Not, how do I transform my personality? Just, what would practicing this look like today? Then choose one small action. If the quality is courage, perhaps you speak during the meeting instead of staying silent. If it is honesty, perhaps you admit a small mistake without decorating the explanation. If it is fitness, perhaps you go for the 20-minute walk you promised yourself you would take. If it is reliability, perhaps you finish one thing when you said you would finish it. If it is self-discipline, perhaps you put your phone in another room for 30 minutes and complete the task you have been avoiding. At the end of the day, ask yourself one question. What did I practice today? Notice that this question is different from, was I good today? That question easily becomes moral self-judgment. What did I practice is more useful, because sometimes the answer will be uncomfortable. You practiced avoidance. You practiced distraction. You practiced making excuses. Fine. Now you can see the path you are creating. Tomorrow, walk a different one. Do this for 7 days. Do not try to become a new person in a week. Simply collect 7 pieces of evidence about what happens when you deliberately practice one quality. The point is not perfection. The point is repetition with awareness. Conclusion. Most of us think change begins with a feeling. First, I become motivated. Then I act. Aristotle asks us to consider the reverse. Perhaps you act first, and through repeated action, you slowly become someone for whom that action is more natural. You do not become honest by admiring honesty. You become more honest by telling the truth when lying would be convenient. You do not become courageous by waiting for fear to disappear. You become more courageous by repeatedly learning that fear does not always have to make the decision. You do not become reliable because you sincerely intend to keep your promises. You become reliable by keeping them. This is what makes ordinary days more important than they appear. Most days do not contain life-changing decisions. They contain small choices nobody will remember. Whether you do the workout, whether you tell the truth, whether you make the call, whether you keep the promise, whether you do what you said you would do after the feeling that inspired you has disappeared. None of these moments looks like a transformation. But repeated often enough, they are the transformation. Motivation asks, "What do I feel like doing today?" Aristotle gives us a better question. What am I practicing becoming